Although Colin fell in love with Penelope in 1824, their story began many years earlier when she was just a teenager who hadn't yet made her debut in society, and he was a carefree young bachelor with no interest in marriage. In the third season of Bridgerton, we got a small glimpse of how these two characters met. While what they showed aligns quite well with the events in the books, today I'll narrate in more detail the moment when Penelope Featherington fell in love with Colin Bridgerton. Without further ado, let's get started. It all began in 1812. Penelope was a teenager who hadn't yet been presented to society. She was overweight and still had a couple of years before leaving puberty behind. Her cheeks were full, and she had traces of acne on them. Prudence and Philippa, her older sisters, had already made their societal debut, and their mother, Portia Featherington, was striving to secure good matches for them, convinced she could make one of them a diamond of the first water. Penelope, on the other hand, knew she would have to debut in the marriage market the following year, despite her pleas to her mother to let her wait until she turned 18, hoping to lose some weight before then. On April 6, 1812, exactly 2 days before her 16th birthday, Penelope Featherington fell in love. It was something summed up in one word: thrilling. The earth shook, her heart skipped a beat, and the moment left her breathless. And it could be said with some satisfaction that the man involved, one Colin Bridgerton, felt exactly the same way. Not in the aspect of love, certainly. He didn't fall for her in 1812, nor in 1813, 1814, 1815, nor in the years 1816, 1822, nor in 1823 either, as he was absent from the country during those periods. But the earth did shake for him. His heart skipped a beat, and Penelope knew without the slightest shadow of doubt that he also held his breath for a good 10 seconds. Falling off a horse tends to do that to a man. The events unfolded as follows. She was strolling through Hyde Park with her mother and 2 older sisters, who were trying to seem interesting to Lady Violet Bridgerton and her eldest daughter, Daphne, who was in her 2nd year in society. Penelope was trying to appear interested in the conversation, though it was likely no one would notice if she didn't. Her mother rarely paid her any attention anyway, when she suddenly felt a tremor in the ground and moved away to see what was happening. She peeked from behind the trunk of a particularly wide tree and observed the scene unfolding right before her. 2 young gentlemen were galloping towards her at a breakneck speed, heedless of their safety, health, and well-being. Her heart raced. It would have been frankly difficult to keep a calm pulse in the presence of such recklessness, and besides, it allowed her to say that her heart skipped a beat the moment she fell in love. Then, by one of those inexplicable whims of fate, the wind decided to blow strongly in a sudden gust, lifting her bonnet, whose ribbons, much to her mother's annoyance, she had neglected to tie properly under her chin, and sending it flying through the air to land smack on the face of one of the riders. Penelope gasped, which left her breathless, and the man fell off his horse, landing rather ungracefully in a muddy puddle. She ran over, almost without thinking, shouting something meant to be a question about his health and well-being, but that actually came out as more of a strangled cry. Surely he would be furious with her, as she was the cause of his fall and his being covered in mud, 2 things guaranteed to put a gentleman in the worst possible mood. But when he finally managed to stand, brushing off as much mud as he could, he didn't lash out at her, didn't say anything scornful, didn't shout, not even a furious look. He laughed, and Penelope's heart leaped. She didn't have much experience with men's laughter, and the little she had was of unkind laughter. But this man's eyes, a rather intense shade of green, expressed only amusement as he wiped an embarrassing smear of mud from his cheek. "Well," he said, "I didn't do that very well, did I?" And at that precise moment, Penelope fell in love with him. When she found her voice, which took a good 3 seconds longer than it would have for someone with a bit of wit, she regretted to acknowledge. She said, "Oh no, it's I who should apologize. My bonnet flew off and—" She trailed off, realizing that he hadn't actually apologized, so there was no point in contradicting him. "It's all right," he said, looking at her with a somewhat amused expression, But she didn't get the chance to say anything else because his attention was diverted to her mother and sisters who had arrived at the scene. Penelope's mother, for her part, shot her a murderous look that she well deserved, as she was, after all, the cause of the accident and had just made an utter fool of herself in front of a bachelor who, judging by her mother's expression, was a very good catch. Not that her mother would consider that she might have a chance with him. No, Mrs. Featherington held high marriage hopes for her older daughters. Portia apologized to Violet for the altercation that might have endangered her son's health, thus revealing Colin's identity as a Bridgerton. Then, when the boy's mother tried to fuss over him, he fled, sensing that Portia was nothing more than a matchmaking mother eager to sink her claws into any opportunity. But the damage was done. Penelope had found a reason to dream. That night, as she replayed the encounter for the 1,000th time, she thought it would be nice to be able to say she fell in love with him when he kissed her hand before a dance, his green eyes twinkling mischievously as he squeezed her fingers a little more firmly than decorum allowed. Or perhaps it could have happened when he galloped boldly across a windswept moor, and the wind, already mentioned, didn't prevent him, or rather, his horse, from riding closer and closer to her. But no, she had to go and fall in love with Colin Bridgerton after he fell off his horse and landed on his backside in a muddy puddle. It was something tremendously odd and tremendously unromantic, yet undoubtedly not without a certain justice, since nothing would come of it. Why waste romantic dreams on a love that would never be reciprocated? Much better to reserve windswept moor introductions for people who could actually have a future together. And if there was one thing Penelope already knew at almost 16 years old, it was that Colin Bridgerton did not feature in her future as a husband. She simply wasn't the type of girl to attract a man like him, and she feared she never would be.